Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer. This is episode 3 of Errol Flynn Slept Here. Today we're going to actually get into the book. And I know you're like, episode 3, we're finally going to get into chapter 1. But I am telling you, there is so much about this man. There was a lot of backstory and I really felt like I wanted to talk with you a little bit about him before we got into the book. And I will tell you, growing up, I never really knew anything about Errol Flynn except that he played Robin Hood and, running around in tights. And then the movie Robin Hood Men in Tights comes out. And that's just kind of what you think of when you thought of him. But the more that I looked into this man's life, the more it just turned into almost like a morbid fascination. Because I gotta tell you, in his heyday, this man was devastatingly handsome. He really did make women swoon and fall at his feet. He was a notorious womanizer, but women just literally threw themselves at his feet. Men wanted to be him. He was suave, he was handsome, he was charming, he was witty, he was intelligent, he dressed well. I mean, I was looking at pictures of him and I was like, wow, drop dead gorgeous, handsome, just really, really beautiful man. And then I looked at pictures of him starting from around his late 30s to up until the point when he died at age 50 in 1959. And it was like looking at a 75-year-old man. And I was just so fascinated what would happen to this man that would age him so unbelievably in just, around 10 to 15 years, going from gorgeous and handsome and like Greek god to, it's not like he was a bad looking man, but he aged so rapidly. And we all know why. He had a really hard life. He was a hard drinker, a hard smoker. He just pushed himself and his life to the absolute limit. But then finding more about who he was and why he took the risks that he took in his life, he was always kind of a sickly young man. He developed malaria very early in his life while bushwhacking and sailing around Australia and traveling in New Guinea. This man dealt with headhunters and he was involved in the indentured servant slave trade, and he was sailing up and down these dirty, muddy waters in New Guinea, getting all kinds of diseases, and he was, a petty thief on the streets of Sydney, and he was on trial convicted of murdering a New Guinea native when he was like 22, 23 years old. He got off because of self-defense, but he was womanizing even back then. He was just doing all these crazy things. He was the head of a tobacco plantation when he was like 21 years old. He did so much living before the age of 25 before he got on the boat sailing to the port of New York to become a Warner Brothers film star. The amount of living that he did, it was just crazy. It's said of Errol Flynn that the more you learn about him, the more you want to know about him, because he's just fascinating. And he didn't really have a very strong moral compass. He didn't really have God in his life. He didn't have a really firm sense of right and wrong. It was just really whatever Errol wanted to do on any given day, whether it was an illegal activity or something that could get him sick or drunk or in trouble or thrown in jail. It was just, he didn't really have limits. He didn't really have boundaries, and he kind of just brought everyone that he hung around also engaging in risky activities that probably weren't good for them as well. But there's just so much about him that is just crazy and morbid and fascinating. It's weird. You look at someone that has the face of a Greek god who is just so unbelievably handsome and has so much going for him, and then you realize how he lives his life and how he really didn't have anything in his life to point him to want to do or say or live the right way. So if you haven't watched the previous 2 episodes, do yourself a favor and go listen to them, because this man is all kind of crazy and all kinds of interesting, and yeah, it is just fascinating. So just wanted to do that little bit out there for you, and then we're gonna get into chapter 1, and this one is called Flynn's Luck. And like all people that live fast and furious lives, and they're dangerous and they just burn out really, really quickly and die tragically, there's always something going on in the family backstory, in the familial area there. And it's sad, but he didn't really have a good relationship with his mother. He was at fisticuffs with her his entire life. And to listen to the way that these writers and Errol himself in his autobiography talk about his relationship with his mother in particular, it was tumultuous. And she was physically abusive towards him, and she was emotionally indifferent to him. And I really think that that did color his life and colored the way he trusted and didn't trust people, and the way he moved and navigated the relationships with all the women in his life. He adored women on one hand and just wanted to be with them all the time and to love them up, so to speak. But then on the other hand, he didn't really trust them and didn't really trust them to have his best interests at heart as well, which was basically the way that he looked at his mother. His experience with his mother, his tragic experience with her, basically colored his entire life. He really adored his father, who was a prominent professor, but his father was very busy working practically the whole time that Errol was growing up, kind of standoffish, although he would take Errol along on his work doing marine biology, archaeological digs, things like that. So just wanted to throw that in there before we get into that, and we can kind of see how his early childhood experiences molded and crafted this man into who he would become. I am reading on my Kindle. I don't have a hard copy of the book. The book was $85 on Amazon. I believe it's out of print, so I bought the, $10, whatever it is, Kindle version. So there's that. So here we go. Chapter 1, Flynn's Luck. Errol Flynn will live a life not unlike that of a man he will portray on screen, George Armstrong Custer. Custer had been an ambitious man of boyish charm, ambiguous morals, and considerable abilities, who became world famous and grew to believe in his own luck, Custer's luck. He was also utterly fearless in all situations, and when he began to rely on Custer's luck, he got himself butchered in Montana. Flynn is, for a decade and a half, as adored for his looks as Brad Pitt, as prototypical a ladies' man as Christian Bale, as charming and laid back as George Clooney. Flynn ranks as the most popular action hero in motion pictures, all 6'2" of him, expressed in lean muscle and physical movement so graceful that he appears to defy gravity with every step. He lives a carefree, adventurous life. He is also fearless in the face of physical or moral danger. And when he starts to rely on his luck, he will get himself butchered in his own version of Custer's Last Stand. Flynn's early life is well documented. He was born in Tasmania on June 20th, 1909, to Theodore Thompson Flynn and Lily Mary Young. Late in his life, Flynn will send a letter to his ghostwriter, Earl Conrad, with changes to his soon-to-be-released autobiography. In this letter, Flynn describes a scandal he has recently uncovered. Looking at his own birth certificate, he relates to Conrad that his parents were married on January 23, 1909, and he was born a mere 5 months later. "Oh, mother, really, how could you?" says Flynn in mock horror. Flynn recommends to Conrad that this information and this quote open the book, and he writes the scenario in full in the letter. Whether because of liable issues or because of approaching deadlines, this information will not make the final cut of My Wicked, Wicked Ways. This is his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways. I'm reading that too. But the episode does much to illuminate the lifelong conflict between mother and son that shapes his character and leads him into a great deal of mischief. And the ghostwriter Earl Conrad said of Flynn that his mother was just a study in contrast, because on one hand, she basically instilled in Errol the idea that sex was dirty and that it was sinful, but yet herself, she actually was a very attractive woman who enjoyed and prompted the attention of men around her. And it was that duality that Errol himself wrestled with his entire life. On one hand, you've got a mother saying that, your privates are dirty, that sex is dirty, that all of that is sinful, but yet she herself likes to flirt and she's very attractive, and she herself did have affairs with men. So there's that weird contrast there. So it says, young Errol sees the attention that men pay his attractive mother. He sees her flirtatious manner in return, and yet she tells him that sex equals sin. So I think that's where his whole idea of it being thrilling and exciting and yet taboo came into play in his mind his entire life. So it says, his memories of constant derision and occasional beatings will last a lifetime and cloud his dealings with women. That was his mother. She used to physically abuse him, and he talks about that in his own writings. Instead of nurturing and praising her son, Lily Flynn demands to be the center of attention. So, Errol must work hard to get noticed, and he learns that outrageous or shocking behavior is the way to do it. He will always attempt to shock and will reveal his scars later in life through a cruel streak, particularly when he's drunk. Lastly, through the derision and beatings at his mother's hand, he acquires two other attributes: self-loathing, that he is never good enough and never right, and a distaste for authority. He scorns all figures who might wield power over him, whether it's teachers or cops or creditors or lawyers or reporters or directors or heads of motion picture studios. Errol Flynn will always have to feel like he's autonomous and not under anyone's thumb. And I really do think that that's what made him live that life. No one's going to tell me what to do. Errol versus Lily Mary, that's his mother, is a strained relationship that fuels a basic conflict about women within Flynn. He is ferociously attracted to the good-looking ones while being unable to trust them. Ultimately, he needs to conquer women to mitigate their hold on him. He gravitates to two types of females: older women who perhaps remind him of mom, and teenage girls, the age he never leaves emotionally. For his entire life, he returns to girls of 16 or 17 or 18 because that's where his mind is stuck, in adolescence. Errol does pick up a valuable trait from his mother. He learns that an attractive outward veneer that includes snappy attire, diligent grooming, and a pleasing smile goes far in the world. And even when he's down on his luck in his late teens and into his 20s, and his clothes are threadbare, at first glance, he looks like somebody. And he even says that in his autobiography. When he was literally penniless and owned a car and a boat, and that was it, he had no money, no other assets. It was at the point where creditors were taking him and his then wife's furniture and their clothes and stuff. He held on to a few outfits and really dressed them up and made it look like he was prosperous, even though he literally was like 2 steps away from being in a street with a tin can. So it was crazy. So it says, Lily Flynn also imbues young Errol with charm, world-class charm, world-renowned charm, but it goes only so far. He has the charm to lure birds out of the trees if he wishes, will say Floribel Muir, a features writer who knows Errol, the film star, very well. But he can be nasty and disagreeable upon occasion. He has a trigger temper that embroils him in fights and arguments wherever he goes. His biologist father is an intellectual, quiet, and introspective, and Errol absorbs this side too. He becomes an observer of life, looking at people and places with the same intense curiosity with which Theo Flynn would examine a rare specimen. He was a marine biologist, thinking deeply and writing tenderly. The good professor also has a roving eye, and rumors of his flings hang around the university long after the Flynns have departed. Errol Flynn is a sum of all these parts, well-mannered and wild, sensitive and cruel, curious and disdainful. These dichotomies will surprise people all his life. Some combination of these traits will make him wildly successful, and others will cause his downfall and early death. Despite their failings, Lily and Theo Flynn are bright, articulate, and inquisitive people, and Errol grows up smart, absorbing from them a quick mind, ready sense of humor, good vocabulary, and desire for an attractive personal presentation. He spends his first 17 years in a variety of locations, including England and Australia, but mostly these years find him in Hobart, Tasmania, as a devil, lazy, undisciplined, and unable to be controlled. He makes an indifferent student who, in 1925, at age 16, ranks 29 in a class of 31. And it says here that a classmate has a telling description of him in the mid-20s when he's in his teens. And they're basically talking about how he has a contempt for convention, a contempt for any type of authority. He just always wanted to shock people, that he was an egoist. He was always getting into fights. And when I was reading about his early years, that Errol writes in his own words from his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, he talks about how he was a bully. He was a bully. And if ever he felt that someone was smarter than him, or someone maybe had something that he was jealous of, or even was physically bigger than him, he would always try to provoke that person, because he had to prove to himself that he could get along in the world and that no one was going to keep him down. But yet he also describes himself as being very sensitive. I mean, he even talks about a story about running away from home when he was 7 because he was being beaten by his mom, and he was gone for 3 days, just wandering around the Tasmanian countryside, going onto these farms, asking the owners of the farms in their houses if they needed work done around their farm, if he could be a farmhand. I mean, he's doing this at age 7. So there's some real damage being done there with the mom, obviously, for him to just act like this and behave like this. It's just really sad. And that one classmate says, quote, extreme good looks, but they were spoilt by an incredibly smug expression, plainly seen in his pictures. And it's almost like he has this inner cyclone, this torment. We all know that cartoon character, the Tasmanian devil, you know, the one that's like swirling up in that cloud that's going around causing havoc everywhere it goes. I mean, that was literally this man. And very apt that he was born in Tasmania, right? So let's see. It says, well into adulthood, Flynn is known for having been stuck in adolescence. It seems that those who know him can't miss it. Errol has never gotten over being 15 years old, says reporter Dan Camp of the Robin Hood era Flynn. When Flynn is 15 years old, he excels in one area, sports. Australian rules football, boxing, and especially tennis. His build, his agility, and hand-eye coordination combine to make him a superior athlete. In a corner of the world where tennis reigns supreme, Flynn becomes a local champion, renowned for powerful ground strokes and confounding placement. But even though he's a good athlete, he keeps getting suspended from the schools that he's attending practically his entire life. I think he got kicked out of no less than 5 or 6 schools in both England and Australia. So he can't even really play for the school teams because he's getting kicked out of the schools. So it says, so he's getting kicked out and he's losing his tennis opportunities and his academic options. So he closes this chapter of his life and heads to the gold fields of New Guinea, lured there by the thought of easy money. So he's 17 years old when he's just like, I'm done with school. I'm done with these headmasters. I'm done with these boarding schools, these rules. I'm out. So it says, Flynn arrives in Rabaul, New Guinea, which writer John Hammond Moore describes as, quote, a swinging South Seas horror of a town, end quote. Here he becomes a character out of South Pacific fiction, sunburnt, clad in dirty undershirt and captain's cap, chomping a cigar and playing cards at all hours. He wears out his welcome in job after job, and he takes none of them seriously. Screenwriter Stephen Hayes knew Flynn well, and he said, with Errol, most things were instant gratification. I don't know whether he had attention deficit disorder or, of course, it wasn't called it back then, but if you tested him for ADD, I wouldn't be surprised if he had it. As Flynn himself will say, as a Hollywood star, and this is Errol talking, I don't plan my days. I'm just ready for whatever happens. His first wife, Lily Demita, will agree. She said, oh, he's appalling. He never knows what time it is and he doesn't care. He has 5 watches and never wears or carries one of them. His second wife, Nora Eddington, will say, Errol's plans had a habit of changing at the last minute. Errol Flynn of the South Seas becomes, in short order, a police cadet, assistant manager of a copra plantation, and that's where you grow coconuts, mechanic, cargo clerk, and many other things, but never for long and never successfully. He lasts longest as a native recruiter, prowling the New Guinea coast, looking for able-bodied black men to impress his laborers. But life is so hard in New Guinea that Flynn heads back to Australia, carrying gonorrhea and malaria with him. Can you believe this? Errol Flynn is now only 20 as the calendar goes, but he's already a world-weary, brawling, poker-playing, womanizing petty thief who has tried and failed at literally dozens of jobs. He becomes enamored of a 50-year-old black-hulled yacht named Sirocco in Sydney Harbor and wants to buy it. With no funds and no credit, he asks his parents to intervene, and it will be the combative Lily Mary Flynn, his mom, who writes a check for £120 for the purchase of part interest in the boat in a desperate attempt to help her son discover adulthood. Flynn will tell wild tales about how he came to own the Sirocco boat, all of which sound more romantic than Mom bought it for me. He and his friends sail Sirocco for several months, using her mostly as a platform to get girls. When he hits a reef, he gives up on his sailing career and drifts on. I talked about that in episode 1. He literally logged in over 2,000 nautical miles with almost zero sailing experience. He just got together with 3 chums and was like, yeah, I'm just going to sail up along the continent, north around Australia, up to New Guinea, and I'm going to do it in this boat that my mom helped me buy. Now, in the book, he doesn't talk about his mom helping him buy the boat. And you'll notice I've watched biographies about him and I've read stuff, and they all kind of say that a lot of the stuff he talks about in My Wicked, Wicked Ways, it's a little murky, and they kind of feel like he embellishes. And this is probably the second or third source that has said that, mommy helped him buy the boat, but he doesn't talk about that in the book. So it says, next, he tries his hand at running a tobacco plantation and fails, but he gives it his gamest effort to date and begins to show a hint of maturity. He also writes short articles for the Sydney Bulletin, revealing a remarkable discipline for the craft of writing, with every word contributing to his theme of the day. His bulletin articles also reflect in print the easy charm that gets him chance after chance in life. And he does say that writing was his first love. I think he would have rather have been known and admired for being a great writer than a movie star. He thought being a movie star was unbelievably boring, and to him it was just a way to pay the bills and have money to do the kind of stuff he wanted and live the life he wanted. It says, and his next chance, so he's getting chance after chance in life, and his next chance is a life changer. He's spotted on a beach and is offered the role of Fletcher Christian in an independent Australian motion picture documentary, and it's called In the Wake of the Bounty. Flynn will later admit that he had no idea what to do on a movie set, and the wife of the director recalls that the charming Flynn, in his weeks of work in the picture, breezed into our lives, caused trouble with the girls in the studio, and left. Sounds pretty on par. And in Errol's own book, and in this book, and in some of the documentaries that I watched, he literally was on the set of that movie for just a few weeks, kind of didn't know what he was doing, breezed in, breezed out, and then just went back to New Guinea to find his fortune, whether it was gold or whether it was working on the plantations, the odd jobs, doing whatever he was doing. It's not like he made that movie, got bit by the acting bug, and then decided that's really what he wanted to do right then. He kind of went back into his kind of jungle bushwhack life, still trying to find himself after he made that movie where he starred as Fletcher Christian. But it did give him a little bit more notoriety in the society set in Sydney, and that's where the book is going to now, where it talks about, it says, his new celebrity leads him into a sexual dalliance with a wealthy, sophisticated member of Sydney society. It is a time in his life when a number of Flynn's inner demons meet: the need to conquer older women, the contempt for authority figures, the ability to rationalize disreputable acts. The woman's jewelry turns up missing, and Flynn leaves Australia in haste, and it said he was never to return again. So while on the run from Australia, it says during a stop in New Guinea to pick up cash recruiting natives, he spends downtime at a Lutheran mission on the northern coast, and he records in his diary, quote, "Colored prints of Christ are regarding me dolefully from every angle of the room. He is portrayed in a large variety of postures. Why is it that Christ is never shown smiling? He must have laughed sometimes." And I'm reading that and I'm just like, he obviously didn't have much faith formation. He obviously didn't have the idea of, yes, we have a just God, but we also have a loving and we also have a merciful God. We always can turn to him in times of need and crisis, and he will never turn us away. And it doesn't really seem like he had that type of formation. And who knows what type of man Errol would have been had he been on fire for Christ, the way he seemed to be on fire for so many just horrible debauchery in his life. Someone like that on fire for Jesus, can you imagine? He probably would have been like a Joan of Arc, on a horse with swords, leading people into battle for Christ. It's just so crazy. But yeah, he does show his sense of humor there, saying, why isn't Christ ever shown smiling in any of these pictures? But obviously the Lord smiled, and he had friends and he had disciples and he had contemporaries and people that he loved. But yeah, I just thought that was a very Errol thing to say. So it says, Flynn takes few things in life seriously, but he will always use his writing to remark on the ironies he sees. He will work hard at writing and wish to be a writer and muster all his forces to focus his meandering attention on it. For periods of time, he will even succeed. And then it goes into talking about when he set out for England. At the time, his father was teaching, I believe, at a university there, and he joined a Northampton acting troupe. And that's where he learned about staging and blocking and scene work. And he did Shakespearean plays and things like that. And it's crazy. It says it's not clear when or why he sets out for England, except that his father is teaching there and acting jobs are plentiful. And on the passage to England, he meets a man who is going to figure later on in his life. And his name is Herman Urban. And he is described as a bespectacled, gap-toothed roughneck who's a braggart, and he has a heavy accent, and he seems to have been straight out of Central Casting, a man every bit as amoral as Flynn. And Urban is a photographer, and Flynn is the writer, and they forge a friendship together. And at that time, they're traveling and adventuring west, and they're doing things like visiting brothels all around Asia, and just like tramping around and camping and living life, and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And it says that they're traveling through Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. They're surviving storm-tossed oceans, all kinds of tropical diseases, headhunters, jealous husbands, because, he's always, he likes to be involved with women that are married. And they are just getting away with all of this. And the author calls this Flynn's luck, and that he's a survivor. And the more and more crazy shenanigans that he gets into and comes out the other side unscathed, it just kind of feeds his desire to want more and more hard and fast living. So don't forget that man's name, the Austrian physician that he befriends on his way to England, called Herman Urban. So he's the photographer and Earl's the writer. So it says Flynn and Urban reach Vienna in June 1933, and Flynn goes on to Paris, where he meets French movie star Lily Demita. The multilingual Demita has much in common with Flynn's mother, down to their first names. Demita is between 5 and 10 years older than Flynn, and we don't ever really know. I think it's more like 5, but some people say up to 8 in some of the things I've watched and read. Lily evades all attempts to pinpoint her age, and like Flynn, she's a sexual athlete. Older, beautiful, fiery, continental, and openly bisexual, Demita throws Flynn for a loop. In their conversations, when they take a break to actually talk, she describes the motion picture business and gives this exciting young man the idea that Hollywood should be his final destination, and Hollywood might best be reached via work at the Warner Brothers Teddington Studios, and I guess that's what it was called back then. He finally reaches England in early July for a reunion with his parents. I guess that's in 1933, and his sister Rosemary, whom he has never really known. He delights in getting reacquainted with his father, from whom he craves acceptance, but he hasn't made any inroads in growing up and finding a career. He writes a postcard to Herman Urban on July 5th, 1933, only 2 weeks after they parted in Vienna, and Errol writes, "Dear Doc, expect letter from me in 3 or 4 days' time with an idea for making money using your photos for a lecture tour. My father thinks he can arrange it with some folks who have cash, really good money. Send the photos as soon as possible. Hope you're okay. Regards, Errol Flynn." Before this scheme can amount to anything, he lands a job at Warner Brothers Teddington Studios, appearing as a dancer in a musical starring the dishy Margot Graham called I Adore You, released in November 1933, but sadly now a lost film. With 2 celluloid credits to his name, remember when he starred in that Australian picture and now in this I Adore You, he blusters his way into the Northampton Repertory Theatre, a company that plays London's West End, claiming to be a swimmer in the Olympics, a champion boxer, and a star of Australian and British films. Fearless Flynn strikes again. He lands a job. The rough and tumble lad with bad teeth and that rowdy Aussie accent will spend 6 months at Northampton, smoothing the rough edges and working 6 days a week, harder than he has ever worked in his life. He will also live lavishly, employ charm on local merchants, and then take care of business as usual, according to author Gary Connolly, quote, by running up debts and leaving town before the debts are settled. And there is a Central Casting type of picture resume headshot deal that he has. And it's really funny because he shows himself as a boxer and he's trying to promote himself as being an Olympic caliber boxer, which is really funny because he was actually a really good tennis player and probably could have gone pro in Australia. And it's kind of funny that he didn't play up that part of his athletic ability, but you can see just how dashingly handsome he was in his tuxedo, and he's very athletic. He's shown with his little boxing stance there. And it says, an ambitious Errol takes out this ad in the British theatre magazine called The Spotlight to trumpet his accomplishments and his promise. Rather than alluding to his considerable and legitimate ability as a tennis player, he chose to hone in on his boxing skills, which is funny. This behavior will prove instructive to Errol a decade later when he is master of Mulholland. Connolly speculates that this is Flynn's way of beating the system, but later, when he's in his physical and monetary prime as a world-renowned movie star, he will still live beyond his means, run up debts, and leave town before the debts are settled. The author is even talking about when he was just that stage player at that Northampton acting troupe. He had a lot of gall and he had a lot of gumption, especially where finances were concerned. And the author is talking about how when he was with that theater troupe in England, he would basically always go to the theater manager or whomever was in charge and ask for his wages in advance all the time. That it was kind of like this pattern because money would just always slip through Errol's fingers his entire life. He would spend it as fast as he would make it. And he's talking about how even when he was at Warner Brothers, he would do that as well. And he would work out these arrangements with studio bosses and often just get money outright and upfront for pictures that he didn't even work on yet. It was just crazy. And it's saying Errol Flynn's career at Northampton ends abruptly after a night of hard drinking and some bad manners. He rebounds by returning to Warner Brothers Teddington armed with a real and fictitious resume, now woven into a tapestry of genuine and imagined skills and hard-earned fanciful credits. And the bad manners that got him kicked out of that acting troupe was apparently he threw the stage manager's wife down a flight of stairs. Like, I don't know what the heck happened there. That's basically all that I could find out was it was just, yeah, like he just threw some lady down the stairs. I don't know if he pushed her or if they were brawling or what the heck happened, but yeah, crazy time. Let's see. So it says, Flynn lands the lead in a B film, catches the attention of Jack L. Warner at the Burbank, California headquarters, and is summoned to America. He arrives at the port of New York on the SS Paris on November 20th, 1934. He lists his destination as Warner Brothers, Inc., Burbank Studios, Hollywood, California, and notes that he plans to stay for 6 months. Isn't that crazy? Only Errol Flynn, right? Only Errol. It's any other person would be like, okay, I'm going to make it in Hollywood. I'm going to stay here as long as I can and I'm going to make it. And he's just, yeah, I'll just, if after 6 months I'm bored and I want to leave, like whatever. He is so crazy. So meanwhile, in the background, don't forget about the first wife, Lily Demita, the silent French movie star. And the author says that the vivacious Lily Demita, fading silent movie siren, hears Flynn's news and determines that she must latch on to this rising star. They arrive in America together and get married in Yuma, Arizona. She introduces him to her American friends in the high strata of Hollywood society. Earl and Lily take up residence together on Appian Way, a narrow, hairpin-curved mountain path located off Laurel Canyon Boulevard in the Hollywood Hills. He lands 2 small roles at Warner's, and then Flynn's luck strikes again. The story of the casting of Captain Blood, the studio's epic million-dollar tale of pirates on the high seas, will be recounted for decades. Jack Warner calls the rookie Flynn off the bench and sends him into the game when all the power hitters are unavailable. Less well known is the fact that Lily is pulling strings behind the scenes. So when the author says that he was a rookie just called off the bench to just carry this picture and see what happens, I mean, he really was. He was a virtual unknown. So it says, Flynn is cast as the doctor-turned-pirate and processed through the studio for grooming and publicity. He goes to star school, gets his teeth capped, and poses for hundreds of still photos frolicking with girls. At the first set of Captain Blood costume fitties, Errol meets a young ingenue who is also getting the star build-up. I was called for a test, simply a silent test, recalls Olivia de Havilland, and they said, would you please stand next to Mr. Flynn? And I saw him. Oh my, struck dumb. So I took my position next to him and I was very, very formal with him because that is the way you were in those days. We had never met and we just stood there next to each other. Oh, so that's Olivia's direct quote. And apparently they had kind of been in love with each other from a distance as co-stars. They starred in 8 films together and she admits in interviews later in her life that she was madly in love with him, but that she knew what type of man he was. Of course she knew what type of a womanizer that man was, and she knew that probably if she did marry him and get into a relationship with him, that it it wouldn't be good. So she kind of loved him from afar, and apparently he loved her from afar as well. And I thought that was kind of sweet. So it says, on the set of Captain Blood, Flynn meets another person who will be important in his life. Tough as nails stuntman Buster Wiles quickly becomes one of Flynn's best friends and a central member of his pack. Wiles is a hard-drinking, hard-gambling charmer with a thick Tennessee accent. He invites the quiet Errol to a crap game on the soundstage. He joined the gambling, says Wiles, and from that day on, he was one of the guys, quite an admired and well-liked star on the Warner lot. For the next 10 years, the fearless Flynn will rarely be found far from the fearless Wiles. And Captain Blood became a multi-million-dollar hit. It was a runaway hit, and the studio knew that they had struck gold with both Olivia de Havilland and Errol. And the book also has a series of photos next to his wife, Lily Demita, and it says that they were posing for a lot of publicity photos together from the studio. And even though her career had stalled and practically stopped, she didn't really care because she was married to him and she was living the high life, and he was one of the most famous men in the world. And she basically says that there was definite advantages in being married to a fabulous and wealthy movie star, except that he pretty much from almost day one started sleeping around on her. And that is how their relationship just started getting more and more just volatile, and they would constantly fight. Basically, they were very hot for each other, and their sexual chemistry was undeniable, but that sexual chemistry was really the only thing that was keeping them together. So we'll get into more of that as the book goes on. But it's talking here about the success of Captain Blood, and it's saying Captain Blood is the big Warner Brothers release for Christmas 1935, and the Aussie roustabout, the guy who can't keep a job and skips out on his bills, the guy who defies authority figures, suddenly finds himself a Hollywood star of the first magnitude. It turns out that the very dysfunctions and personality disorders that made him a miscreant on other continents allow him to fit perfectly into Hollywood, where he becomes a formidable problem of the man in charge at Warner Brothers Studio, Mr. Jack L. Warner, perhaps the toughest authority figure Errol will ever have to bedevil. Isn't that fitting? So it seems like Hollywood has always been just the most vile and debaucherous place going, right? People with the loosest morals you ever want to meet in your life, all kinds of just crazy going on there, right? Yeah. So it says, as Flynn begins his career, he doesn't know that the most important piece of real estate in his life is just up the mountain from Warner's. On a clear day, he could even see it, if he knew, that is, where toward the southwest to look. So that's the end of chapter 1, and I love it. I'm so excited. I hope you guys are enjoying the book. Stay tuned for the next episode coming very soon. This one is called The Road to Mulholland. This is how he gets more and more success in Hollywood and how he begins to scout out a location for his dream home. And he wanted it high up, and he wanted it secluded, and he wanted basically to be able to be just away from the world where he could live the way that he wanted to. And that is what his home, Mulholland House, and the farm, which is the acreage, the 11 acres that he bought, that's what that was all about. His playground, his castle, and we're going to get into all of that. So I can't wait to bring that one to you. Be on the lookout for it. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. You can get caught up on the first 2 videos that I made for this Errol series. I will link them below. I'll have a playlist for you, so you can definitely go back at any time and binge watch all the episodes, get yourself caught up. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I can't wait to see you on the next one. I will talk to you very soon. Bye.